Why do scientists keep dying? We can't make jokes because it's a serious topic. I wouldn't make a joke even if I could, because it's a serious topic and I don't make jokes about serious topics. A couple of weeks ago, on February 27th, a retired 2-star general walked out of his house in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and never returned. He left his phone on the counter, he left his glasses on the table, but he took his .38 revolver, his wallet, and his hiking boots. His wife came home an hour later and the house was completely empty. That was a couple of weeks ago. The FBI is still looking for him and they have found absolutely nothing. His name is William Neal McCaslin, and for the last 3 decades, he ran some of the most classified research programs in the United States Air Force. McCaslin wasn't some desk jockey, as they call them, who retired and moved to the desert. He was a commander of the Air Force Research Laboratory at Wright Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio, where he oversaw $2.2 billion a year in military science and technology programs. That's a lot of responsibility. To put that into context, the AFRL is the Air Force's entire science wing. Every experimental weapon, every next generation aircraft, every piece of technology the Air Force hasn't yet told us of flows through that laboratory with McCaslin and Dexter. Dexter's probably there as well. McCaslin was the person in charge of all of that. Advanced propulsion systems, directed energy weapons, hypersonic research, next generation sensors, stuff that's talked about now in disclosures, but used to be talked about in tabloids. All right, scary stuff. Before that, McCaslin ran the Space-Based Laser Project, which is a thing, apparently, and served as chief engineer on the GPS program and held leadership positions at Kirtland Air Force Base and the Pentagon, my favorite shape. He has degrees from the Air Force Academy, MIT, and Harvard. This is a man who spent 30 years inside the most classified rooms in the country, and then one Thursday morning, he walked into the New Mexico desert with a fucking revolver, and nobody has seen him since. That's honestly terrifying. And I, personally, with the help of you, will get to the bottom of it. Just kidding. This is a very dark rabbit hole we're going down, and it's scary. We love to see a fella in STEM. We love to see a gal in STEM, but mother of God, shit's getting scary out there. Now, the name Wright Patterson means something if you follow certain corners of the internet. It was headquarters for Project Blue Book, the military's official UFO investigation that ran from 1952 to 1969. And for decades, there's been a rumor that wreckage from the Roswell crash from 1947 was shipped there to study. Kirtland Air Force Base, kind of a big deal. And in 2016, somebody from one of those corners of the internet put that connection into writing. Tom DeLonge, the guitarist for Blink-182. He also went on to found a UFO disclosure organization. That is the correct Tom DeLonge, by the way. Yes, and he can rip, I think. I guess. I'm not a big Blink-182 guy. I'm more of a Vladimir Owen type guy. In 2016, Tom DeLonge sent an email to John Podesta, who at the time was Hillary Clinton's campaign chairman. That email ended up on WikiLeaks, and in it, DeLonge, quote, wrote, "He is very, very aware, as he was in charge of all the stuff. When Roswell crashed, they shipped it to the laboratory at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. General McCaslin was in charge of that exact laboratory up to a couple years ago. He not only knows what I'm trying to achieve, he helped assemble my advisory team. He's a very important man." That's a WikiLeaks email. Quote, I don't think that's how Tom DeLonge sounds, but, McCaslin wasn't just mentioned in these emails. His personal email, gmail.com, shows up in the Podesta archive, confirming the time zone for a DeLonge-Podesta meeting on January 25th, 2016. I was playing Feed and Grow Fish that day. Also, probably a smart idea to bleep and blur his personal email address. His wife Susan's email accepted the Google Calendar invite for the same meeting. They were both active participants and not bystanders, and DeLonge was name-dropping them. They were coordinating logistics directly with Podesta's office. So it's pretty official, crazy stuff. Now, why is the Hillary Clinton-Podesta connection important? Well, obviously the conspiracy corners, Wright Patterson, UFOs, all this stuff. Okay, conspiracy, that's what this whole thing is about. There's a bunch of people who have gone missing, who are tied to strange, bizarre things, and when McCaslin disappeared on February 27th, the internet went exactly where you'd expect. Because on February 19th, just 8 days before he vanished, President Trump ordered the declassification of UFO files. This is about UFOs. All right, guys, this is about 0 point energy. This is about the horrors of the man-made institution of science. And 8 days after that, the general who Tom DeLonge said was in charge of the Roswell material is gone. It's bizarre. There's a bunch of little loose pieces all over the place, and we're going to try to connect some of them in a respectful, obviously, way, because this is too bizarre not to talk about, but there's not a lot of information to tie it all together to truly understand what is going on. Ross Coulthart, an investigative journalist who covers UAPs for News Nation, called it a, quote, grave national security crisis. Congressman Eric Burleson went on the Weaponized podcast on March 13th and confirmed General McCaslin definitely is connected to the UAP topic. So there's plenty of people tying those threads.
Well, General McCaslin definitely is connected to the UAP topic.
McCaslin's wife, Susan, has been posting on Facebook since the disappearance, and she is pushing back on almost every single theory. She wrote, Neil does not have any special knowledge about the ET bodies and debris from the Roswell crash stored at Wright Pratt. She said it seems quite unlikely that he was taken to extract very dated secrets from him. She even joked, maybe the best hypothesis is that aliens beamed him up to the mothership. That's honestly a really fun way to look at it. I feel for her. That sounds terrible. That sounds very traumatic that her husband just walked away and left, and all these people on the internet, including myself, are saying, well, aliens, I guess? I don't really know. Do you know? Because I don't know. It seems suspicious, though. And it also seems like it's worth talking about, in all honesty. So she's refuting some of the more conspiratorial things, but she's also disputing the medical framing as well. The Silver Alert announcing his going missing cited medical issues, but she says he was sharp and not disoriented, and she did describe him as at some risk, but never said what that risk was. So his wife is denying the UFO theories, the kidnapping theories, and the dementia theories all at once, while being someone who was herself in the Podesta meeting and whose own email is in the WikiLeaks archive. So there's some level of legitimacy as to her involvement in all of this sort of web, and she's saying that none of the explanations fit. You may believe the official story, maybe you don't. If you go on Reddit right now and search for McCaslin, you'll find threads in r/UFOs, r/aliens, and r/conspiracy. Web sleuths have been running this shit for weeks, running it back. One comment on r/aliens, which military.com actually cited in their coverage. Military.com, by the way, a major defense publication pulling from r/aliens, says, it's crazy how all the scientists go missing when they discover science that could change the world. It's a little strange. It's a little fucking strange. On r/UFOs, the dominant theory is that McCaslin disappeared because of Trump's declassification directive. Trump ordered the release of UFO files on the 19th of February. McCaslin vanished 8 days later, and to people in those communities, I suppose there's no such thing really as a coincidence, which it is odd. Also, where are those files? Did he release anything? I think we invaded Iran instead. I think we invaded Iran and didn't get any more on the Epstein files. The what files? Who? Who didn't himself? I don't remember, guys. Who's this? A beacon of truth in dark times. Interesting. So we have 0 answers, and we are left with a 68-year-old general who ran one of the most classified programs in the Air Force, walking into the desert with a loaded revolver, and nobody, not even his Weifenheimer, not the FBI, not the 700 homeowners they've canvassed, can tell you why. One of the things that drives the conspiracies with all of this is the other deaths of whistleblowers that are mysterious, like the Boeing whistleblower's deaths, or last year, a 26-year-old OpenAI researcher named Sushir Balaji was found dead in his San Francisco apartment 1 month after agreeing to testify against OpenAI. Balaji had published a paper arguing that OpenAI's use of copyrighted data wasn't fair use, which is the core of a massive lawsuit. His death was ruled suicide. His parents allege a cover-up and are demanding an FBI investigation. And once again, we have the Boeing whistleblowers, John Barnett and Joshua Dean. Both died within 2 months of each other in early 2024, and both were actively involved in legal proceedings against Boeing. Barnett was a quality control inspector who'd worked at the company for 32 years. Dean was an auditor at a Boeing supplier, Spirit Aerosystems, who'd flagged defects in 737 MAX fuselages. This is back when the Boeing ship was just falling apart. Barnett was found with a gunshot wound in his truck in a hotel parking lot in the middle of a multi-day deposition. And 8 months before McCaslin vanished, a 60-year-old materials scientist named Monica Riza disappeared as well while hiking in the Angeles National Forest. Riza worked at Aerojet Rocketdyne, which is a real name of a company, somehow, where she invented a patented nickel-based superalloy called Mondaloy, which is an alloy that is designed to withstand the extreme heat inside of a rocket engine and built specifically to end American dependence on Russian rocket technology. Professionally, she went by the name Monica Jacinto, and her work caught the attention of the Air Force Research Laboratory, which funded the programs that depended on her alloy. And the person who oversaw that funding was the director of AFRL's Space Vehicles Directorate at Kirtland Air Force Base from 2001 to 2004, and that person was William Neal McCaslin. On June 22nd, 2025, Riza went hiking the Mount Waterman Trail with two experienced companions. She became separated from the group and was never seen again. Search teams deployed helicopters, cadaver dogs, drones, and ground-penetrating radar across months of searching, and they found absolutely nothing. No trace, no body, no gear. Two people connected to the same classified materials research program are both gone 8 months apart. And 4 days after Riza vanished, a 53-year-old woman named Melissa Casillas disappeared from Talpa, New Mexico. Casillas worked at Los Alamos National Laboratory. Both she and her husband were LANL employees of the Los Alamos National Laboratory. Los Alamos, deep rabbit hole, by the way. On June 26th, she drove her husband to work, came back home after forgetting her security badge, dropped off a sandwich to her daughter around 1 p.m., and by 2:18 in the afternoon, she was last seen walking down a state highway with a backpack on her shoulder. Her car and her purse were found at home, so were both of her phones, her personal cell, and her government-issued phone, and both had been completely wiped and factory reset, and she has not been seen since. It's an unbelievable amount of coincidences. She wiped her phones before disappearing, conveniently. 4 days after a rocket scientist vanished on a hiking trail 60 miles away, conveniently. Material scientist and the guy that fucking founded the one guy. In October of 2025, Jacob Pritchard, a 34-year-old analyst at the Air Force Research Laboratory at Wright Patterson Air Force Base, the same base McCaslin once commanded, by the way, a colleague, First Lieutenant Jamie Gustidis, then his own wife, Jamie Pritchard. And then he himself. Officially, it was treated as a domestic incident, and honestly, that's probably what it was, just because it's a super top secret, insane Air Force conspiracy zone. Doesn't mean people don't do murders. And then in December of 2025, a 45-year-old scientist named Jason Thomas, the assistant director of chemical biology at Novartis, who held active contracts with the Department of Defense, walked away from his home in Wakefield, Massachusetts, vanished. Another guy. His body was recovered from a lake on March 17th, 2026. Cause of death still pending. Then just a few days ago, on March 23rd, Congressman Tim Burchett of Tennessee went on record with the Daily Mail, which is the most reputable source of information and news in the world. Tim says that he believes there's a pattern. Just because somebody's an elected official doesn't mean that their opinion becomes the official opinion or the best opinion or the rational opinion or the logical opinion. That is true. But more and more people are questioning this. More and more is starting to pile up, and less is adding up. Tim said, quote, "The numbers seem very high in these certain areas of research. I think we'd better be paying attention, and I don't think we should trust our government." Hey, Tim, member of the government, I agree. Burchett claims that intelligence agencies have actively thwarted attempts to find out what happened to these researchers. He claims that. Is there any evidence of that? There is a lot of evidence of intelligence agencies thwarting attempts to find out what has happened recently. Take the entire FBI that doesn't actually investigate anything at all and hasn't in the last 2 years. Either way, it's fucking scary. The through line for all of this is that people who know things that threaten powerful interests die. And that's true. There's a lot of history of that happening because it makes sense. It just makes sense. People don't go down without a fight. And the death of one rando is, not as important as the interests of the company. Guys, invest. Yes. McCaslin isn't the only mysterious circumstance surrounding a very important scientist. Back in December of 2025, 3 months before McCaslin vanished, we have the case of Nuno Loureiro. Loureiro is in his kitchen in Brookline, Massachusetts, making dinner with his wife. Their 2 daughters are in the living room playing cards. Loureiro is a 47-year-old man, director of MIT's Plasma Center and Fusion Center, and one of the most respected fusion researchers alive. You've got fusion and you've got fission. I know exactly what both are, but I'm not going to tell you here, because you'll just have to learn that on your own. His work focused on magnetic reconnection and plasma turbulence, the physics that would make fusion energy possible, harnessing fusion energy possible, because fusion energy obviously is possible. It is the reaction that powers the sun. If you can do it on Earth in a controlled way, you can solve the energy crisis and, the conspiracies around free energy, death, all that stuff. There's no carbon emissions from it, there's no meltdown risk, and you can get almost unlimited fuel from seawater. Loureiro was one of the people trying to make that happen. He ran a center with 250 researchers across 7 buildings, and his most recent work was using quantum computing algorithms to simulate plasmoid behavior. 11 months earlier, Joseph Biden, the president of the United States of America, handed him the Presidential Early Career Award, which is the highest honor the US government can give to a young scientist. I've actually got one. I'm just kidding. Funny, I shouldn't joke. So Loureiro's doorbell rings, and tragically, his 12-year-old daughter gets up to check. She sees a man in the lobby who appears to be carrying a package, wearing a yellow vest, dark clothing, and a hat. Nuno follows his daughter to the door and tells her to come back inside. She then hears 3 or 4 gunshots and finds her father on the ground and watches the suspect get into a parked vehicle and drive away. Loureiro was shot in the chest, abdomen, and both legs, and 6 shell casings were found on the lobby floor, and he died at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center the next morning. And obviously, within 48 hours before anyone knew who pulled the trigger or what exactly happened, the conspiracy machine was already running. Ira Stoll published a post claiming that Loureiro was Jewish and had been targeted for his support of Israel. Canadian researcher named Casey Babb created a viral post that said this: Jews worldwide are being hunted and killed, and then listed this and the Brown and MIT attacks from the days before as evidence. You see, 2 days before Loureiro was killed, someone had opened fire at Brown University, killing 2 students and wounding 9 in a classroom during a review session. And all of this was looped up and folded into the exact same narrative with this, unclear sort of motive. Some of it was true, some of it was not true. Obviously, these things just get blown out of proportion all the time, and the conspiracies run wild. What we do know is the man that killed Nuno Loureiro was named Claudio Valente. He was Portuguese, not Iranian, okay? Not a political operative or a known foreign agent. Known, not known. He was a physicist, or at least he had trained as one, and Valente and Loureiro had attended the same program at Instituto Superior Técnico in Lisbon from 1995 to 2000. Valente graduated first in his class with a 19 out of 20, and that was ahead of Loureiro. And before university, he'd represented Portugal in the International Physics Olympiad, which is apparently a fucking thing. That's crazy. They got Physics Olympics? He came to Brown University in 2000 for a physics PhD, and his one friend there was a classmate named Scott Watson, who later told reporters that Valente hated Brown and hated Providence. Valente left after 3 semesters. And then for 22 years, produced no research, didn't do shit, sat on his fucking thumb with it in his butt, had no academic position, no professional trail that anybody could find. He did get a green card through the diversity visa lottery in 2017 and was living in Miami by the time of the attacks. But the DOJ investigation remains ongoing, and they still haven't explained what he did during those 2 decades or how he supported himself or what the was going on, other than he was just angry at his ex-class people. On December 13th, 2015, Valente walked into room 166 at Brown's Barras and Holly buildings, the same building where he'd taken classes 25 years earlier, and he opened fire on a room of students in an optional economics review session. He killed Ella Cook, who was 19 years old, Mohammad Aziz Umarzakov, who was 18 years old, and wounded 9 others. Police recovered 44 casings from the crime scene. And then 2 days later, he drove to Brookline and killed Loureiro at his front door. Then he drove to a storage unit in Salem, New Hampshire, recorded 4 confession videos in Portuguese, totaling 11 minutes and 15 seconds, and then shot himself in the head. In the videos, he said, I am not going to apologize because during my lifetime, no one sincerely apologized to me. Then he said, I am sane, and called mental illness explanations as bullshit excuses. The DOJ later said that Valente showed no remorse during the recordings and, on the contrary, exposed his true nature when he blamed innocent, unarmed children for their deaths at his hands. So it doesn't seem like Luriero was killed by Iran or some kind of shadow government or anyone trying to suppress fusion research. He was killed by a inexplicably crazy person, former classmate who graduated first in their shared program and then failed at everything after and spent 25 years building a grudge that ended with 3 dead and 9 wounded across 2 attack sites within 3 days. Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know if I buy that, to be honest with you guys. I don't know. That doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. So maybe comment down below. A lot of important people have been just dying. And maybe it is not, there is no coincidence, there's no conspiracy, but I'm really hungry right now, and I think it's clouding my judgment. Now, 3 months back in the future to February 2026, again, a fellow by the name of Carl Grillmeyer, a 67-year-old Caltech astrophysicist, was also inexplicably murdered. Carl was an astrophysicist who had spent nearly 30 years at the Infrared Processing and Analysis Center, and he led the 2007 paper that was the first to capture enough light from exoplanets to identify molecules in their atmospheres. He discovered dozens of stellar streams and faint trails of stars left behind by galaxies colliding with the Milky Way. Pretty fucking insane shit. 147 peer-reviewed papers. That's a lot. Plus a NASA Exceptional Scientific Achievement Medal, which sounds pretty cool too. Grillmeyer lived in Llano, California, which is a remote community in the Antelope Valley, and he chose it for the dark skies. He kept a home observatory with several telescopes and spent his free time flying small aircraft. On a Sunday morning, deputies found him on his front porch with a gunshot wound to the torso, and he was pronounced dead at the scene. The suspect was Freddie Snyder, a 29-year-old who lived 2 miles down the road. Detectives say the two men didn't know each other and no motive has been released, but Grillmeyer had called the police about Snyder before. On December 20th, 2025, 5 days before Luriero was killed, Grillmeyer called the police to tell them that someone was trespassing on his property. Deputies found Snyder nearby carrying a loaded, unregistered rifle. He claimed he was on his way to the post office. Post office was in the opposite direction from where he was walking, so he was probably not on his way to the post office. He was arrested, but the judge who handled the case, Osman Abbasi, dismissed the charges under a California law that allows judges to drop cases in furtherance of justice, deciding a gun safety course was sufficient for a man caught trespassing on a scientist's property with a loaded, unregistered rifle, and told a story about the post office that didn't match which direction he was walking. To me, that doesn't exactly make that much sense, but oh fucking well, I guess. Snyder had a court date set for February 5th and didn't show up. They didn't issue a warrant. Nobody went looking after him, and 11 days later, Grillmeyer was dead on his porch. A Substack writer named Jessica Reed Krause, who has nearly 500,000 subscribers, published a piece titled, "A Second Scientist Shot Dead on the Front Porch of His California Home." She wrote, "Two respected scientists versed in planetary catastrophes were shot at their homes within weeks of each other, and media just scraped right over it," which is completely true. And you guys don't have any idea how many people have emailed me about this and, tagged me in tweets or whatever. And I'm trying to find the connections, but it's like this, there's got to be a cabal of some kind that I'm not privy to really, it seems like maybe people are fucking insane, potentially, but they are like, no, I'm actually sane and I'm killing, I don't know. But this is the timeline that people are pointing to. Luriero, December 15th, Grillmeyer, February 16th, McCaslin, February 27th. It's a short period of time for some pretty high profile science-related people to all just disappear or die mainly, and then disappear one. Neither the case of Grillmeyer nor Luriero seems from the official story like a conspiracy. Both have explanations, insane ones that, this could absolutely happen. This has happened before. It's just the fact that these are really high profile science people. That's the reason why it looks bizarre and conspiratorial. And the clustering of it is what has people talking. And McCaslin just fucking disappeared. And he's involved in plenty of conspiracy adjacent things. Fusion research is one thing. McCaslin, that's like That's like the treasure trove of conspiracies over the last 100 years, basically. So yes, there are official explanations, and maybe we should believe them. Because it's not like there's ever been a time when a scientist was killed fighting something that was conspiratorial that turned out to be real. That's never happened before, except for in March of 1989. Another scientist closely related to fusion and just unbelievable power science was murdered in a very bizarre, unusual, but also completely logical and rational way. It seems to just happen to these people. Because how many fucking scientists are there that even do this shit? They keep getting killed. Stanley Pons and Martin Fleischmann said they produced excess heat in a jar of heavy water using a palladium electrode and a battery. That is cold fusion. Have you seen the Fallout TV show? It's kind of dog shit, gonna be real. But cold fusion, pretty cool. Now, if it was real, this means, obviously, limitless clean energy for essentially nothing. No nuclear reactors, no radioactive waste, just fucking jars and batteries and shit. And now the scientific establishment had spent decades and billions of dollars trying to achieve fusion the hard way with massive reactors and superconducting magnets. And if two chemists in Utah had done it with a jar, that meant that every fusion lab in the world, including MIT's, had been spending money on the entirely wrong approach. So the big geniuses at MIT tried to replicate the experiment, and their own data showed something interesting. Excess heat in the deuterium oxide calorimetry. Not definitive, but it's something, guys. The calories, they're calorying. But a fellow by the name of Eugene Malov saw something different. Malov was MIT's chief science writer at the time, so he had access to all their drafts and reports, etc. And he noticed that the report changed between July 10th and July 13th over a period of 3 days. In the July 10th draft, the calorimetry curve showed excess heat above baseline, but in the July 13th version, the curve had been shifting downward. The excess heat had disappeared. Both drafts, by the way, if you want to look at them, still exist. Here they are. You can compare them side by side. The shift is visible. But while this is happening, MIT's Plasma Fusion Center threw a party. They called it the Wake for Cold Fusion. They even had commemorative coffee mugs made. They started celebrating before the tests that they were celebrating had finished. Ron Parker, the head of the lab, publicly called his own data worthless. Malov resigned from MIT over the discrepancy and wrote a book called Fire from Ice, laying out the case that Pons and Fleischmann's results were real and had been suppressed. Arthur C. Clarke wrote the introduction and called it the only good book on the subject. And he helped fund Malov's next project, a magazine called Infinite Energy that he ran for the next 15 years while lobbying the DOE for a second review of cold fusion. By the way, the Department of Energy, the Atomic Energy Council, all of these institutions that came into existence post-World War II, hand in hand with the CIA, they are hyper compartmentalized. And if you think the CIA has things that are classified, there are born black compartmentalization beyond what you can even comprehend. Okay, guys? Private classification goes so much deeper than public classification, governmental programs. I mean, it is fucking insane. Born secret programs, 1948 and on. It is a fucking rabbit hole that's so interesting, and I might do a video on it maybe one of these days. But by 2004, the Department of Energy agreed to a second review. Their last review was in 1989. Then on May 14th, 2004, someone beat Eugene Malov to death. It happened at his childhood home in Norwich, Connecticut. He'd been renting the house out and recently evicted the tenants and went back to clean the place up when a man named Chad Schaefer, who he had just kicked Chad's parents out, showed up and confronted him. Schaefer pled guilty and got 16 years in prison. Second suspect, Mazel Brown, was convicted of murder and sentenced to 58 years. And a third, Candace Foster, pled guilty to obstruction. Case closed. Except in January 2025, Brown's conviction was overturned. Prosecutors had hidden their deal with the key witness, which is a Brady violation. And as of right now, March 2026, that case is still pending retrial. So, the murder of Eugene Malov is technically still unresolved for one of the two people convicted of it. The conspiracy theory is that Malov was silenced before the DOE review, and that's probably not true. The evidence points to a confrontation, a perfectly logical and sound, violence happens every single day. It's just the timing with the DOE review appears to be a coincidence, yada, yada, bada bing, bada boom. It always seems like there's a convenient excuse for something happening that's way less interesting and way less fucking terrifying, in all honesty, but most importantly, way less interesting. That being said, the two drafts still exist, and the shift in the calorimetry curve is documented and visible in side-by-side comparisons. MIT never conducted an internal investigation into how or why the data changed between the 10th and the 13th, and the Wake for Cold Fusion party is confirmed by multiple attendees. They had commemorative mugs made. Malov seemed to be correct about the suppression and very unlucky about the tenants. So that's really bizarre. Or maybe it's not. I get my cold fusion research and information from the Fallout television show. So yeah, the government has been known to suppress things and classify things that are important for the American people to know. And outside of our own domestic operations, it's pretty normal for scientists who are studying this type of thing to get killed. But it isn't about free energy. It's more so about nuclear bombs. For example, the Iranian nuclear scientists, motorcycle assassins, magnetic car bombs, drive-by. I mean, in November of 2020, Israel used an AI-controlled machine gun, a modified FN, mounted on a robotic platform inside a parked Nissan pickup truck on a residential street outside Tehran. They did some Breaking Bad shit. So governments definitely kill scientists, for sure. But not all scientists are created equal, and some are, allegedly making nuclear bombs. I don't know anything about science or nuclear bombs. The thing that's so interesting about these things that creates the conspiracy theories is these people are doing really important work that would make everybody's lives a lot better if it just if they solved an issue or whatever, but it's going to ruin the bottom line of some government or some oligarch or whatever. So when you solve a murder like this and the case is closed and it's mysterious, there's unanswered questions, loose strings, it's really interesting. And comment down below what you guys, what you think. Is it too mysterious? I don't have any idea. Either way, I hope we learn more about McCaslin very soon, because he's really the only one that's truly unsolved. What happens when there are not just one or two unsolved, but rather 25 unsolved murders surrounding this type of thing? GEC Marconi was the biggest defense electronics company in the United Kingdom with over 250,000 employees and one of the first listings on the FTSE 100, which is a big deal. In the 1980s, they were building some of the most sensitive weapon systems in the Western world. The Stingray torpedo, a lightweight anti-submarine weapon with computer-aided guidance, was a major Ministry of Defense contract worth hundreds of millions of LBs, pounds. It's apparently what the British people call money. And they were simultaneously working on components of Reagan's Strategic Defense Initiative, what everyone was calling Star Wars, space-based missile defense, satellite radar, and electronic warfare systems, the kind of work that required Official Secrets Act clearance and positive vetting from British intelligence. Now, between 1982 and 1990, 25 scientists and engineers connected to those programs died. A journalist named Tony Collins, no relation to my wife, at Computer Weekly, the UK's leading IT trade publication, started getting reports in the mid-80s of deaths. An engineer here, a programmer there, the kinds of deaths that show up in the back pages of a local newspaper and never really make national news. This guy kept a list. By 1987, the deaths were coming 3 and 4 in the same month, and the methods weren't usual. These weren't people swallowing pills or stepping in front of traffic, albeit neither of those things are that usual. But by the time he published his book, Open Verdict, in 1990, the list had 25 names on it. Collins later submitted Freedom of Information requests to the MOD, the Ministry of Defense, asking about the deaths. Government's first response came more than 6 months late and didn't even acknowledge his application, which is a legal requirement under FOI, Freedom of Information law. Coroners ruled 7 of them suicides. 7 received open verdicts, meaning the coroner could not determine how they died. 4 were ruled accidents, and 2 were ruled misadventure. Nearly a third of the cases, the coroners looked at the evidence and they didn't know what the happened. So what were the methods surrounding this? Arshad Sharif was 26 years old and he worked for Marconi on satellite-based submarine detection. In October of 1986, he drove from London to a public park in Bristol, not far from where another Marconi employee named Vimal Dajbhai had died just weeks earlier. He tied one end of a nylon rope to a tree and the other end around his neck. Then he got in his car and floored it. The car ripped forward and pulled his head off. A metal rod was found on the floor near the pedals, possibly used to jam down the accelerator, and he'd been acting strangely for days and paying for things with unusually large banknotes. That was ruled a suicide by popping your fucking head off like you're trying to pull your tooth out with a door. That's fucking crazy. Dajabai, the man who died weeks before Sharif in the same city, was a 24-year-old software engineer who worked on torpedo guidance systems for Marconi. He was found 240 feet below the Clifton Suspension Bridge in Bristol with his trousers around his ankles and an unexplained needle-sized puncture wound on his left buttock that the coroner's office said was a mystery then and still a mystery, or it remains a mystery is the exact quote. But friends unanimously said that they did not believe he killed himself. David Sands loaded his car with 2 extra 5-gallon petrol cans, made a U-turn, drove at high speed into an empty restaurant, and the fireball that engulfed him was so intense they identified him through just dental records. Peter Pipel was found jammed under his car with his mouth on the exhaust pipe in a position that police said wasn't physically possible to get yourself into. Richard Pugh was found in his flat with his feet bound and a plastic bag over his head and a rope coiled around his body, and the coroner ruled that one misadventure. So, yeah, 3 deaths, a couple of open verdicts. One of them was officially misadventure. What the f does that mean? Alistair Beckham was a 50-year-old software engineer working on SDI pilot programs for Plessy Defense Systems, who was described by his colleagues as highly secretive about his work. After a normal Sunday afternoon of gardening, he went to his shed, attached electrical wires to his chest, plugged them into a wall, stuffed a handkerchief in his mouth, and turned on the power. His wife said she was entirely unconvinced it was suicide, and hours after his death, men from the Ministry of Defense arrived and removed documents and files from the house before any investigation had concluded. Probably because he was working on top secret stuff, right guys? Where's that boot at? I'm gonna lick the boot. After Sharif's death, a Bristol coroner said, "This is past coincidence. I will not be completing this inquest until I know how 2 men with no connection to Bristol came to meet the same end here." Yeah, the guy has morals maybe or something. Clive Jenkins, head of the union representing scientific and technical workers, called the deaths statistically incredible. And he knows statistics, he's a fucking science guy. Douglas Hoyle, a Labour MP, went to Parliament and asked, does anyone really commit with his trousers halfway down? In 2022, though, one of these cases was solved. Shani Warren, a 26-year-old woman who worked for a company that was acquired by Marconi a week after her death, had been found drowned in 18 inches of water, gagged, with her hands behind her back, bound, and her feet tied and a noose around her neck. For 35 years, her death was listed as a part of the Marconi cluster. Then, DNA evidence linked it to a convicted serial rapist named Donald Robertson, who had zero connection to Marconi or defense work. So at least one of the 25 was definitively unrelated. That still leaves 24 scientists working from the same company, working on the same shit, just fucking dying in an 8-year window by methods that coroners can't explain. I don't know, dude. Seems really, really scary, though. And it isn't just the UK. How about the deaths in Indian nuclear scientists? There's a lot of... I don't want to be a nuclear scientist. I don't want anything to do with nuclear shit, all right? That fusion. I don't even know what any of that is. I said earlier, don't play that clip. Don't roll that clip. No. I didn't say that. You've got fusion and you've got fission. I know exactly what both are. I didn't say it. I don't know what any of that stuff is. All I have is this. I don't even know how to use it. Between 2009 and 2013, 11 Indian nuclear scientists died under what the government itself classified as unnatural circumstances. 2 PhD researchers at the Bhabha Atomic Research Center, Umang Singh and Partha Pratim Bagh, burned to death in a 3rd-floor lab fire 1 kilometer from the nuclear reactors. As we know from the Demon Corps, people been known to fucking die working around, people been known to blow up and shit, okay? That's been happening for a long time. But forensic reports said that there was nothing flammable in the room, no fire extinguishers were on hand, and the fire truck got lost and arrived 45 minutes late. Neither family has ever been told the cause of the fire. Then we have 2 engineers working on India's first nuclear submarine, the INS Arahant KK. Joshi and Abhishivam were found dead on railway tracks near the naval yard in Visakhapatnam, but reports said that the men were not crushed by a train, although we've seen the videos of that happening in India. and their families allege they were killed somewhere else and placed on the tracks afterwards. The Indian government said the deaths were unrelated. So there is historical precedence of science people in the nuclear trades dying mysteriously and maybe getting killed. I'm not saying it's a conspiracy, all right, but I'm also starting to question every thing I've ever been told officially by any government or organization that stands to gain anything from me not knowing the truth. So stick that in your pipe and smoke it. I'll talk to you guys later.